Hey guys, today we're covering Module 10, the nervous and endocrine system. Let's get to it. Okay, so our nervous system is basically made up of the millions of neurons in our body. In fact, billions. So the nervous system, the definition is our body's speedy electrochemical communication network, which consists of all the nerve cells of both the peripheral and the central nervous systems. So we have we have lots of nervous systems, but the two main divisions in our nervous system are the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system, or the CNS, is made up of our brain and our spinal cord. And we'll go into pretty great depth about those things in our next module, specifically the brain. But basically, the CNS, the central nervous system, is the part of our nervous system that's really calling the shots, because mainly the brain is telling the rest of the body what to do. Now, the peripheral nervous system is the part of our nervous system that is carrying out the actions made by the CNS, and also receiving information and taking that back up to the brain and other body parts. So that's the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. Now, nerves are just the electrical cables that are made up of bundles of axons, and they are the things that link the central nervous system to our body's sensory receptors, our muscles, and our glands. So the two major breakdowns are the CNS and the PNS. Okay. Now, the peripheral nervous system breaks up into further divisions, though. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about several different types of neurons. There are three main types of neurons. So first, there are sensory neurons. Okay. Sensory neurons are the neurons that are receiving information from your senses. So for example, if I prick my finger with this pencil, a sensory neuron, which we also call an afferent neuron, is taking the information from my sensory receptors in my finger. It's carrying that information up into my spinal cord to my brain. It's sending that information that something's happening here. Okay. So sensory neurons carry messages from the body's tissues and sensory receptors to the spinal cord and brain for processing. Now, I'm touching this thing. I'm touching this pencil. That's sending information up into my spinal cord, where interneurons are processing it. Interneurons are those neurons that work in the brain and spinal cord that basically relay messages between sensory neurons and motor neurons. Okay. So, for example, if I were to hurt myself, if I were to, I don't know, like stab myself with a pencil, that information is going to be taken up from the sensory receptors into my spinal cord, where interneurons are going to then relay that message into the brain. That message is going to come back down, and then I'm going to probably do something about it. If I got pricked hard here, I would probably move my hand. And that action would be taken or would be carried out by a motor neuron, which is what we call efferent neurons. So basically, sensory neurons are giving information to the brain about what is happening. Motor neurons are carrying out the actions as directed by the brain and spinal cord. So if you have your hand over something hot, like let's say you put your hand on the stove, the pain sensation, the feeling is going to come in through the sensory neurons. Those are going to transmit those to the spinal cord. That will then be relayed via an interneuron, okay, and sent to a motor neuron, which will then direct my hand to move, to get off of the stove. So we have millions of sensory neurons, millions of motor neurons. We have billions of interneurons, and interneurons are the ones that really make up the vast complexity of our brain. And so right here, you see what we call the reflex arc. So let's say a pin, you step on a pin, that receptor is going to send messages to these sensory neurons. those sensory neurons are going to relay that information into the spinal cord. These interneurons, they call them relay neurons here, but these interneurons are going to send that message then to a motor neuron, and that motor neuron is going to send that message to the muscle to tell you to move your finger or move your foot, whatever you are feeling. Okay, now the peripheral nervous system has two mini nervous systems within it. So we've got the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And within the peripheral nervous system, we have the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. So, somatic nervous system, if I'm waving at you right now, that is because of my somatic nervous system. Any type of voluntary muscle movement is carried out by the somatic nervous system, because this is the part of our peripheral nervous system that is responsible for our skeletal muscle movements. Okay, so any kind of voluntary movement, all of these things I'm doing with my hands right now, this is being carried out by the somatic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, on the other hand, is a part of our peripheral nervous system that is carrying out actions that we do not have to be consciously aware of. They're not necessarily voluntary. So, for example, heart rate, breathing, even blinking. These are actions that are being carried out by the autonomic nervous system. So, autonomic, think automatic. These are actions that are being carried out pretty much automatically. Digestion, you don't think about digesting your food, you just do it. Your body just does it without you having to be aware of it. Now, for some of the actions controlled by the autonomic nervous system, like breathing, they can be consciously overridden, but for the most part, these types of processes are being handled automatically. Okay, now, I'll move this. But within the autonomic nervous system, there are two further divisions. So let's start at the top. Okay, we have the nervous system. That goes into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Within the peripheral nervous system, there is the somatic and the autonomic. Now, within the autonomic, we have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So, the two subdivisions of the autonomic nervous system work together to produce homeostasis, that balance within the body. Our sympathetic nervous system is the one that activates the fight or flight mode. So if you are perceiving a threat, your autonomic nervous system, specifically your sympathetic nervous system, is the one that's going to direct those behaviors to try to help you survive. So, for example, if you encounter a cougar in the wild, these things might happen. Your pupils might dilate. You might stop salivating. Your bronchi will be relaxed. Your heart rate will increase. It will stop you from digesting your food. It will stimulate glucose production and release. So you have sugar and energy to do the thing you need to do. Maybe you need to run. It will secrete adrenaline. It will inhibit bladder contraction. This is why sometimes when people are scared, they pee themselves. It may also stimulate orgasm. So the sympathetic is the fight or flight mode. If you are experiencing any danger and your body is responding with any of these types of behaviors, then it's likely that the fight or flight mode is being activated via the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system, in contrast to the fight or flight mode, we call this the rest and digest mode. So hopefully, unless you have chronic stress or chronic anxiety, most of the time your body is engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, where your pupils are constricted, you have proper saliva flow, your heartbeat is, slow and steady, your digestion is good, all of that fun stuff. So basically, when you're in sympathetic nervous system, your body is redirecting energy, which is why it stops digestion, so that if you need to run or fight, you have the energy to do it. When your body is at rest or calm, your parasympathetic nervous system is going to try to basically use those resources to help you in that long-term survival. So sympathetic is for short-term survival. Parasympathetic is for the long-term survival. Okay. Now, our central nervous system. So some estimates put the number of neurons a human has around 86 billion. That's a lot. And the brain's neurons cluster into work groups called neural networks. The reason that they do this is so that they can have short, fast connections. Basically, things that you practice more and more, you learn about more and more, every additional piece of information that goes into that kind of category will create that neural network. So they say neurons that fire together wire together. Now, in the central nervous system, a big part is the spinal cord. And the spinal cord basically serves as a two-way information highway connection to the peripheral nervous system and the brain. So basically, let's say I'm trying to kick a ball, for example. That information is going to be sent from my brain down through my spinal cord to a motor neuron to carry that action out. Now, reflexes are automatic responses to stimuli, and reflexes actually don't go to the brain all the time. More often than not, a reflex, why it happens so quickly is because instead of going all the way up to the brain, it actually just goes up to the spinal cord and straight back down to that muscle. So, for example, when your doctor taps your knee and you have that little knee jerk, the reason why that's so quick is because it's not being processed by the brain in that moment. It's actually just going straight from the sensory receptor into the spinal cord and back down to your motor neuron, which carries that to the muscle to jerk. Painful stimuli also work in this same function. Now, it's very important to have a functioning spinal cord. Otherwise, messages from your body cannot get to the brain. And so you won't be able to feel anything like pain or pleasure. So the spinal cord is something that is very important for our daily functioning. Okay, and then we have the endocrine system. So the endocrine system we're going to do more on block day with, but the endocrine system is basically another system of communication that uses hormones to send messages rather than neurotransmitters. So it is interconnected with the nervous system, but it's what we consider slow chemical communication rather than fast, like a neurotransmitter would work. So the endocrine system, instead of using neurotransmitters, they use hormones. And hormones are chemical messengers that are made by the endocrine glands, and they travel through the bloodstream and they affect tissues, and they also are used to communicate with the body and the brain. Now, hormones are much slower than neurotransmitters at getting the message across. However, they are longer in their effects. So, for example, once I was in a car accident, and I felt so unnerved for a long time after the accident. Even though I was safe, I was still shaking, my heart was racing. And that's because adrenaline had been released via my adrenal glands, which is a hormone that helps in fight or flight. And the effects lasted longer than maybe norepinephrine would in my brain because hormones stick around longer. So it took me about 30 minutes to relax after the accident because the hormone was still kind of lingering in my body. Now, you will need to know these different glands and what they all do. So the hypothalamus is a brain area, actually, that controls the master gland, which is the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is a gland that basically directs all the other glands in the endocrine system, and they secrete a bunch of different hormones, but some that are important are growth hormone, as well as this hormone called oxytocin, which we'll talk about. The thyroids right here, these give out hormones that basically control your metabolism, so thyroxine. And parathyroids help to regulate the level of calcium in the blood. Your adrenal glands, they sit on top of your kidneys, and they basically help trigger the fight or flight response. The pancreas is going to regulate your blood sugar. So we'll talk more about that when we talk about diabetes. And then the testes, obviously, they control the male sex hormones like testosterone, and the ovaries in females, they are in charge of the female sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone. Now, quickly, adrenal glands, they are the pair of endocrine glands that sit just above the kidneys, and they secrete hormones that help arouse the body in times of stress. Like I said, they secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine, also known as adrenaline and noradrenaline. The pineal gland, which wasn't mentioned in that diagram, is a little tiny gland in the size of your head. Little tiny gland located in your head, in your brain, that actually regulates the release of melatonin for sleep. Now, the pituitary gland is also in the head. It's a pea-sized structure, and it's in the core of the brain, and that is controlled by the hypothalamus, but it directs the rest of the glands. So the hypothalamus controls the pituitary gland, which controls all the other glands. So like I said, the pituitary is known for regulating growth hormone, for physical development. It also regulates oxytocin, which is a chemical that has a bunch of different things. In women, it is the chemical that starts contractions during birth. It also helps stimulate milk flow, orgasm in males and females. Also is really important in pair bonding, group cohesion, and social trust. So often when women breastfeed, oxytocin is being released in both the baby and the mother, which is being controlled by the pituitary gland to help build that bond. So the basic system of the endocrine system is the brain, aka the hypothalamus in the brain, tells the pituitary gland what to do, which tells other glands what to do, which releases hormones, which then affects both the body and the brain. So it's kind of a circular system. And here are your test yourself questions. I will see you later.